Hello, welcome to another episode of the Silk and Steel podcast. I'm your host, Carl Zha. Today we have a very special guest. We have Mr. Zhong Xiangyu.
Xiangyu, not Xiangyu.
Xiangyu, I'm sorry. Mr.
Yeah, not
Xiangyu, who is a Taiwanese American rapper, a Taiwanese American Marxist rapper. So that's very unusual. That's why I'm having him on the show. Welcome to the show, Mr. Zhong.
Hello, glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to our audience? Because I think you can probably do a better job than I can. I think you have a very interesting background. I mean, the fact that you are Taiwanese American and you're a Marxist, I think that just that description turned heads a little bit. So why don't you get into a little bit and talk about yourself?
Okay, so I think you did a pretty good job covering the basics. I mean, I understand what you mean by like Taiwanese American, like as in I was born and raised in the U.S. But like Asada Shakur said when she moved to Cuba, what was it? Soy de los Estados Unidos, pero no soy Yankee. That's how I feel about myself. So yeah, typical, diaspora kid. Spent a lot of time in Taiwan as a child. So always felt connections with their and Chinese culture in general because I couldn't speak English until I went to preschool. I mean, I kind of spoke English when I went to preschool, but I didn't really speak it on a really I didn't have a good command of the language until like first or second grade in elementary school. So
that's fine. You still speak it better than I do, even though I probably spoke it longer than you have. Well, I'm sorry, how old are you?
I'm 26.
Yeah, I spoke English longer than you have, but you speak it better than I do because I came.
Well, you started as a teenager.
Yes, I came to this country right after I think I was 13, almost turning 14, and I think there's some study out. Somebody told me there was a study out on accent, and supposedly, 13 is a cutoff point, right? If you come before 13, you're learning the different new foreign language, you will be able to acquire without accent. So I'm just barely past that mark. That's why you can still hear a little bit of accent when I talk. But that's
kind of interesting because I've been told I have a Chinese accent, like a slight one.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I've been told that by some people. Like, I don't really care. It is what it is.
Yeah, me neither. Let's talk about yourself. So how did a diaspora kid, born from parents from Taiwan, discover Marxism? I mean, how does that happen?
Well, this is pretty interesting because you say that my parents are from Taiwan, but actually the truth is only my mom is from Taiwan. My dad do you know about the Chinese diaspora in Korea?
Yes.
Yeah, my dad's part of that diaspora, and because of the political environment when he was born, the only Chinese government recognized was the Chiang Kai-shek clique in Taipei. And then the Park Chung-hee regime didn't recognize children of non-Koreans as Korean citizens, and because my grandfather was from Shandong, my dad just kind of became recognized as a so-called ROC national, so he became like a fake Taiwanese in a way.
Oh wow! So you're like third generation diaspora. Was your dad born and grew up in Korea?
Yeah, but he went to a diaspora school. Like they had what they called the Huachao 学校. So like, and then like the whole curriculum was designed by the Ministry of Education in Taiwan. So he had the same education, but I mean outside of school, he of course picked up Korean and stuff like that. He speaks Korean fluently, but at home he was required to speak Chinese by my grandfather.
So how did he move from Korea to Taiwan or United States? How did that happen?
He went to Taiwan for university, and when he was 21 or 22, my grandfather passed away, so he wasn't in the mood to continue his studies. And around that time, my aunt had already immigrated to the U.S. My ergu, so my father's older sister married an American GI and went to the U.S. And then after my grandfather died, at some point my grandmother also moved to the US. And through her, my dad got a green card and he decided to move to America.
Oh, is that where he met your mom, or did they meet in Taiwan?
No, they met in the US. They worked at the same restaurant at one point.
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah, and my mom was like had gone through a divorce before that. So, yeah, that's how my mom got to the US. Her ex-husband had some sort of like relations. I think he's like one of those cuz he was like 外省人 or like his family my mom's ex-husband's family came from the mainland like after the Civil War. So they had some connections with the KMT and I don't know what sort of connection, but he was able to get a green card. So
What about your mom? Is she also part of the Weissen and the immigration wave from mainland after 1949, or
no, my mom is like sixth generation in Taiwan. On my grand like if I trace the ancestry through her father, they originally came from Zhangzhou in Fujian.
yeah, that's pretty typical. Many like
Yeah,
so-called Taiwanese people came from either Zhangzhou or Quanzhou, the two cities, two districts in
yeah,
Fujian. Yeah.
which is pretty interesting because the Minnan spoken in Taiwan is pretty much a mix of the two dialects of Minnan, like Quanzhou and Zhangzhou. And that's the same in Xiamen, so then it's like it's pretty easy to understand what they're saying like when I went to Xiamen.
Oh, so okay, so you grew up in U.S., but
Yes.
how did you were you sent to Taiwan to live with your grandparents, or what was the context?
Oh no, but when I was younger before I went to school, my mom would my for the first few years of my life, my mom was kind of full-time mom. So then like sometimes we would go to Taiwan for many months at a time.
Nice.
So that's why I consider like, Taiwan like a home. I have a sense of belonging there just because I spent so much time there as a kid. And I mean, when I was in the US as a child, I really couldn't communicate with non-Chinese kids until I started learning English. But I mentioned my father's Korean thing because I think it's because of that this sort of diverse background in my family. Like I have like like Taiwan Fulao, like mom, like uh, Han Chinese in Taiwan with roots from like Fujian from like the Qing dynasty or the Ming dynasty. Qing dynasty, probably, yeah, Qing dynasty. So you have like so then you hear their story, but then you have like my dad who's like kind of a Weissengren, but also not really because like he grew up in Korea. But then like when he went to Taiwan, he was kind of considered like kind of Weissengren, but also like Korean. But then like he doesn't consider himself Korean. And then you have me growing up in the U.S. So then like at a young age, you're used to hearing like different versions of like the same story or like different things. So you realize that the world is a lot more complicated than like what you hear at school or whatever. And I think this is a common phenomenon among diaspora kids or like minority families in the US. And then you just times that by like two because you have like a slightly different background. So then, I mean, even as a kid, I would just hear a lot of things about like, the Chinese Civil War or like the Korean War or how Korea was divided because I was playing around with the globe in I think kindergarten and I saw that Korea was divided into two. There was a North Korea and South Korea. So I asked my dad like, which side are you from and why are there two of them? And then so then I kind of had an idea that things aren't that simple. But then like when I was older, I started hearing things like North Korea threatening the US with nukes or whatever. And then around it was also an interesting time to grow up because in the 1990s, I remember as a kid when I went to Taiwan, most of the people there still identified as Chinese. But then that's not really the case anymore with a lot of the youth. And then I just remember just I had what was it? One of those satellites that could receive like Chinese channels. So then at a young age I saw like a lot of just politics in Taiwan, like when Chen Shui-bian was elected as Taiwan's leader, etc., etc. So then like in the US, you're also I guess it's a little bit different for you since like as a teenager you come here pretty much like yeah I'm Chinese. I'm not gonna try to like really be seen as like American American. Am I correct?
Yeah, pretty much.
But then like if you grow up in the US, it's kind of like I guess a lot of diaspora kids go through this identity crisis where like, am I American or this or that? But I've been told at a young age that like, okay, you can be as whitewashed as you want, but you're never going to be seen as truly American. And that might seem kind of harsh to some people, but that's their reality. So then I made it a point when I was like a teenager to learn how to read Chinese. I could always speak it decently, but I could before I was in high school, I couldn't read it much. So then there was part of me that really wanted to connect with my roots, and to connect to your roots, you really need to understand your history, and you well, I guess not. I guess nowadays all I had to do was drink boba, according to like the subtle Asian traits type diaspora
Drinking
people.
boba.
Yeah, I mean, like, but see, like, I wanted to get beyond like this sort of superficial understanding of my culture. So then a lot of that involved like understanding, especially like recent Chinese history, like 20th century, and then like the history of like Taiwan, and then eventually some stuff about Korea. And then there was this one, and then I went through a phase where I wanted to reconcile being Chinese with like being a good, decent anti-communist. But then the more you but then the
Be a blooded American. You gotta love apple pie and baseball, and your mother too.
yeah, it's just I don't know, it's just like growing up with this sort of like diverse background and hearing all these different stories, you eventually draw logical conclusions to things. And then like I really wanted to understand why certain things were certain things in Taiwan. And then like, growing up, you always hear like Taiwanese liberals just saying, "Oh, it's just Chinese oppression, this and that." But then you look into the actual politics, the economics, and all of that stuff, you realize Taiwan is effectively a client state of the US. So then if you want to make more sense of that, you have to understand US imperialism. So then when I was like 19, 20, 21, I was reading a lot of stuff about like anti-imperialism. Like I was reading stuff by, I believe, I got to Chomsky eventually. There's a lot of like questioning, and then I realized that like in America, liberals, like so-called liberals, or like Democrats, and like the conservative liberals, the Republicans, they may differ on issues like abortion or like gay rights and stuff like that, but then when it comes to foreign policy and imperialism, they're pretty much the same.
Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons for that. One is information, right? Because we can make pretty good judgment about the media coverage when it comes to U.S. domestic issues, because everybody, all the Americans living in U.S. are pretty familiar with
Yeah.
the context. It's a lot harder for media to bullshit us because we can immediately call them out. But whereas it comes to foreign policy, let's face it, the general knowledge about the outside world, about the world outside U.S. is
Yeah.
very minimum in United States, and most people. The joke is, most people can't find a country like a Canada on a map, world map.
I don't think it's a joke. I think it's true,
It is, but so
which is a sad state of the public education in the US. And this brings another point. Cause like growing up like in a petty bourgeois environment, we go to public schools here, and like in the US, if you come from like the middle classes or above, your public education is going to be pretty decent. So then you don't realize that like how messed up the public education in the US is, and you tend to think that the situation in impoverished public schools are the exception rather than the rule.
yeah, I mean,
But then you dig deeper, and then you're just like, wow, like most Americans are very ignorant, not because they're just like stupid or whatever, but because of the
yeah,
situation. And like a lot of it just has to do with being poor and just not being lucky enough to get a decent education.
I mean, even and also, people kind of live in their own bubble, right? I mean, like I don't know about your situation, but I was after I came to United States after I was 13, I went to inner city Chicago public schools, and I then for high school, my freshman year, I attended Kenwood, which is deep in the hood in the south side of Chicago. I take a bus like for an hour and a half every morning to get to it, and it goes through some really decrepit neighborhood on the Chicago South Side. I mean, I have seen I have seen that part of American life,
Yeah.
to be honest, like for people who grew up in like white suburbs, in a middle class neighborhood, I'm not sure if how much they're exposed to that side of America, and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
It's kind of interesting because when before I was 4, I grew up in this small town called Farmville because that's where my dad ran a gas station. And Farmville, you know what they did when schools were forced to integrate, they just decided to shut down their public education altogether for many years because they didn't want the white kids and black kids going to school together.
Wow.
And then what ended up happening was the richer kids, most of them happened to be white, went to private school, and then the poor people, which covered like the majority of the black people, just didn't have an education for quite a few years. So then I've seen like that part of America as a kid, and then it's because of that sort of environment my mom wanted to move to move to the suburbs of Richmond. So I mean that's where my parents met. I mean that's where they lived for a few years before they moved to Farmville.
Are
But
there a lot of Asian American kids where you grew up?
no, when I graduated from high school, I was the only person in my graduating class who spoke Chinese fluently.
Wow.
But I wanted to bring up a similar story because he talked about going to school in the inner city. When I was in middle school, they I was sent to a so-called gifted program, and what they really did was so my county is pretty big, and like the northern part of the county is pretty well off, but then the southern part of the county is pretty impoverished. It's just in bad conditions, and you know how like in America, like how much funding your school gets depends on like the housing, what is it, property tax that the students' families pay.
Yep.
So then like you also have things like if a school underperforms, it doesn't get federal funding. I'm not exactly sure how all of it works, but what they did was they ended up putting together a gifted program that gets kids from all over the county, mostly from the better off areas. And then they put the gifted program in like one of the poorest middle schools in the whole county. And then they segregated us from the rest of the kids, except for a few classes like PE or like orchestra and stuff like that. And then what we did was we artificially brought up their test scores, but then they weren't. I mean, in what is it in Chinese, like 治标不治本.
Wow. So they basically did that just to jack up the average score of the school. Wow.
Yep. And so that was my first exposure to like first I mean, okay, I talked about like the countryside when I was a kid and like Farmville and stuff like that. But then this was like during my formative years when I saw like how poverty could really fuck with people. Because you had these kids and then like of course at first like you have these stereotypes about like certain people, and then if you don't understand the context, you'll kind of see superficially, yes, they're like more aggressive, you get into fights more, but then like once you start to actually get to know them and understand them, then you realize, hey, like they could have I could have easily been them if I had been unlucky.
Yep.
And then so then that was like kind of my first awakening, and then my introduction to hip hop was around then. I mean, before I was introduced to hip hop through video games like True Crime, Streets of LA, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, because like inside the video game they had these radio stations that played hip hop, and I liked it. Now this is the thing: when I was a very young child, I played piano and violin, so then naturally a lot of the music I listened to was classical music, and then around that time, my classmates were listening to things like Simple Plan, Blink 182, Yellow Card, like that kind of music, and I've always found that to be lame. But then I was also made fun of for listening to classical music. So then I'm like, okay, I need to find something that's like not lame, but I don't want to listen to the stuff they listen to because I find that lame. And
You remind me of the Eddie Huang story,
a little bit, yeah.
I like people will know Eddie Huang as the guy who wrote Fresh Off the Boat,
Yeah.
which was made a TV series in US. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, so then that was like my sort of brief introduction, but then one day in PE class, this black kid just gave me a list of songs. So then I'm like, oh, are these like song suggestions? And he was like, nah, these are songs my dad and I want you to download. And then I was like, how do you know I know how to do this stuff? And he's like, cause you're Chinese. So then I did download the songs, and then I listened to them, and I thought they were pretty cool. So then I wanted to listen to more, so I started asking people about like what they liked. And around that time, there was like stuff like Chameleonaire, like Ryden, and that sort of stuff. And then once, I mean, I was on the internet all the time because I mean I grew up in the suburbs, I had nothing better to do. It was either like internet,
Drugs.
true, but then I wasn't cool enough to do drugs.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't in the in crowd for that until like later, and then but then it was never really my thing. So yeah, I started listening to more hip hop, and then it was around that time I wanted to improve my Chinese. So then I would just look up a bunch of like the way I did it was I would listen to a lot of like C-pop, and then I would print out lyrics, and then I would go and write them. And then if I saw a character I didn't recognize, I would look it up and keep on writing them. And then I also try to chat with my relatives in Taiwan more online so I could practice reading and writing.
Wow. What time frame was this? Is this like 90s, 2000s? What were we talking?
Early 2000s, like early to mid 2000s.
Okay, because I'm thinking like I for longest time I did not listen to Chinese music because I thought it was lame. Like yeah, for I think for a period maybe 10 years since I came to United States, from the time I was 13 to maybe after I graduated college, so that would put around like 2000, early 2000, because for longest time, I thought, like a lot of the C-pop is kind of syrupy. It's always the same, the same topics. They'll sing about broken.
少了你的手背当枕头，我还不习惯, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and but lately though, I'm amazed to discover lately is maybe it's a function of the Chinese society is getting wealthier, so people's tastes are branching out more, or the society can actually support more variety of artists, because now lately, I mean, there's an explosion of different music genres in China, and I was
Yeah.
really surprised by that. And there's some really good beats coming out too. So that's why I asked you about the time frame. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. So then I felt the same, but then I mean those songs are like there's easy topics, so then you can really just focus on the language. So then I listened to a lot of like Zhou Jielun and then some Cai Yiling. I kind of had a crush on Cai Yiling when I was like 14, but whatever. Um,
Many people did. Many people did.
but then like around that time, I was curious about like Chinese rap.
Okay.
It was around that time like I heard about this guy named MC Hot Dog, and yeah, you may or may not know him nowadays. I mean, yeah, of course you know him nowadays. But this was in 2007 or a little bit before. I think it was a commercial because like the satellite TV in America for like the Chinese community, all the stuff is the same as in Taiwan, but then the commercials are localized, so they're like targeted towards like Chinese in America.
Mm.
So then I saw a commercial for an MC Hot Dog concert in I think like New York or Los Angeles or somewhere. So then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna look this guy up. So then I knew about this guy, and then one day I was in Chinatown in New York when I was 14, and I saw a bootleg copy of one of his earlier EPs, so I bought it. And I got into trouble on the car because one of the songs, one of the chorus of one of his songs was literally "Cao ni ma ge bi, Cao ni ma ge bi, fuck Kulong and HOT." So then, yeah, my mom wasn't amused.
Wait, how did your mom find out?
No, because she was driving the car, and I wanted to listen to the CD. Because I
Oh,
went to it was her friend, me, and my friend who went to New York for a few days, and then we bought that CD, and we were just laughing our asses off listening to
oh, you have to explain to my, non-Chinese speaking audience what that meant.
It means fuck your mother's cunt. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we can continue.
It was around that time, and then you also get introduced. I also got introduced to other people who rapped in Chinese, and then like there was also like I also got into like conscious rap in the U.S. that talked about social economic issues. I think I started off with like things like people like Nas, Common, Talib Kweli, Lupe, and stuff like that. But then I wanted to see if like there was Chinese rap like that, but then unfortunately it was like all liberal stuff.
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah. So then it's also like many years later, I've further developed my politics, and I've become a communist.
How did that happen? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Um, well, it started off. I think earlier I talked about studying imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
In college, I studied economics, and I noticed they talked about the invisible hand, but never the visible gun.
Hmm.
So then I'm like, okay, well, this stuff works on paper, but in theory, but then in reality, you send like these soldiers abroad to like overthrow governments that don't cooperate with you, and then then you just do like resource extraction and make them make like cheap watches or whatever.
So is your initial interest in imperialism is because you wanted to understand the situation in Taiwan?
Yeah, 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 and like like the rest of China, etc.
Yeah.
Because I mean, and especially like since my dad was from Korea, I mean, like in Korea, like he actually had U.S. troops stationed there, and like it's pretty
Yes.
much apartheid, like from just stories I've heard. And then it's like, okay, well, like some of the liberals in Taiwan talk about like independence or whatever, and then like they talk about how if you're recognized by the UN as an independent country, then you're an independent country. But then I'm like, no, look at South Korea. Like that, they don't seem too independent to me. Like, how can you be an independent country when you have foreign troops stationed in your capital and other places?
Especially in the US media, rarely talk about, but it's so glaringly obvious when you look at all the reportings on North Korea, right? Especially when Donald Trump started his North Korean peace initiative, and the media goes crazy, but it's always about US, North Korea, US, North Korea. You never get hear about how South Koreans might actually feel about the peace process. It's always posed as a issue between United States and North Korea, right? And
And then you have these like what else did they say about like the South Koreans? It was just like they just go on the streets and ask people how they feel, and then most of them are just like, well, we want peace, we don't want nukes.
yeah, I mean, like it's very disingenuous. I mean, like the news
Yeah.
reported here, it's almost like South Korea doesn't matter, right? I mean, like it's like, come on, you at least pretend South Korea is not a client state, like. But no.
What really pisses me off is like when the rhetoric saying like, oh, South Koreans want Americans there and like the US is protecting them. I mean, okay, after many decades, I believe that like a lot of South Koreans just want to maintain the status quo if they're doing well for themselves.
I mean,
I
there
mean,
were
that's
actually demonstrations, many demonstrations of South Koreans
yeah.
against a U.S. base. I mean, U.S. base is not popular in many places around the world, but especially in East Asia. I mean, like the U.S. bases in Okinawa is especially unpopular. Like the majority of Okinawans want the U.S. out of there, but of course, because the Japan-U.S. security alliance, U.S. is there to stay, and the Japanese government they don't want U.S. bases on the Japanese mainland, which actually get Japanese people upset about. So they stick in Okinawa, which is this piece that's acquired by Japan, like in the late 19th century, and always seem as somewhat not real Japanese. So have these Okinawans deal with Americans, and the Okinawans don't like it, and these kind of things are rarely reported in the U.S. mainstream media.
Oh no, like in the US media they try to make it seem like everyone likes Americans. Like when in Afghanistan, I remember in Afghanistan, they would show videos of like people like thanking Americans and children going up and hugging US soldiers and stuff like that.
I mean, that's how they sold the narrative that the Iraqi people will
Yeah.
welcome us with flowers, right? Like in the lead up to Iraq
Yeah.
war, but I think I do need to point out that American soft power, American pop culture, is very popular around the world. I mean, including hip hop,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
it's the part of the American soft power. I mean, people do admire U.S. for its wealth, for its power, for variety of reasons. People like American culture, and they may even like Americans, but they don't like American military bases on their soil. I mean, it's very, very clear. But people, the mainstream media often confuse the two, right? It's like, oh, they love America. Okay, okay, they love American culture, but they don't want American boots on their neck, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah. And this brings a good point. You mentioned how how the American media can trick people in here in the US about other countries, but they can't really like BS things about things that are happening in America
Yep.
as effectively, right? But this is the thing, the problem with the media in Taiwan is a lot of their international news is pretty much just US media translated into Chinese.
Yeah, I think that's
And then the thing is they don't live in America, so then they can buy into the BS that the American media pushes. So then like they'll talk about things like Xinjiang, but then they'll know nothing about like ICE concentration camps in the US. And they'll talk about like Hong Kong and like how the police like might have like some of the clashes between the police and the rioters. But then they don't understand police brutality in the US.
that
Like they don't understand how like in the US like those people would have been shot like a long time ago.
that's what really amazes me is, even people that's so close to the Chinese mainland, right? Like Taiwan and Hong Kong, that you would think they would know better. Even those people, sometimes I watch television program from Taiwan or Hong Kong, and it just amazes me how much ignorance there is about mainland China. And like it's a meme now on mainland Chinese social media. I think there was a Taiwanese talk show host. This happened recently too. He's talking about the slowing down of Chinese economy. He's using a benchmark as the consumption of the tea eggs. 茶叶蛋, he said like oh, it gets better. It's like, oh yeah, like the Chinese people, they're doing poor, and they can't even afford to eat tea eggs. They can't even afford to eat 茶叶蛋. And it's become a meme on mainland China. It's like, yeah, it's so bad over here. We can't afford to eat tea eggs, and they just did it one better recently. There was another Taiwanese talk show host cited the sales of the Chinese pickles, 榨菜, right? There was a decline. Apparently, one of the famous Chinese
Yeah.
pickle brand, Fulin 榨菜. First he called it Peilin, which is stupid. It's called Fulin. It's a town that's right next to my hometown, Chongqing, right? It's famous for its pickles, and they cited this Fulin brand of pickles have been doing. The sales have been declining, and he's saying, well, because the mainland Chinese people are so poor, they normally use their main staple is ramen, and you guess what? They consume ramen with pickles, with 榨菜, right? Right now they're so poor they can't even afford 榨菜. That's what.
No, the McCarthyism in Taiwan right now is scary. Like in the past few years, like 2017 when I went back, things were like kind of normal. I mean, you had the typical like whatever. This year especially, like every day, like on the news, especially like the news channels that are more pan green, like at least there's like at least an hour of nothing but just vilifying like not just China in general, mainland China in general, but also mainland Chinese people. Like they'll just feature like video compilations of like poorly behaved mainland Chinese tourists, and it's just so obvious. It's so glaringly classist because like a lot of this like the bad behaviors are just associated with people from like rural areas who don't understand like life in cities and just kind of bring their mannerisms over. It's like whatever.
Yes. That actually is worth to talk about, because these poor behaving Chinese tourist videos are, first popularized in Taiwan and Hong Kong, and it's actually propagating throughout much of the world right now. And you know what? Yeah, I get it. Some of the stuff that people do is genuinely shocking. Like people having their kids pee in the trains and stuff. I don't understand it, but again, like you say, because China is a rapidly developing economy. So there's a lot of people literally millions, tens of millions of people who were brought from like recently rural background being put in the cities. Like this is the first time they're experiencing urban life, and this is the first time they have enough money to travel abroad to places like Taiwan or
Yeah.
Hong Kong. Yes, some of their behavior is shocking, but like you say, it's totally classist. It's totally classist. But
And you're not going to take videos of like normally behaved tourists, like tourists who like don't take dumps on the side of the street.
yeah, and then they extrapolate that, and they just trying to paint all the mainland Chinese are these uncouth barbarians, come here to pollute
Yeah.
our environment. I
Most of the people in Taiwan who have like who like actually know mainlanders and have mainland friends aren't like that extreme about like their like the anti-mainlander sentiments. Like that at most they'll keep their criticisms to the government, like if they don't agree with certain things. But then you
yeah,
really have like this sort of like populism, which is just like we hate all things mainland, like we hate the people, we hate everything. And then in the end of the day, it's pretty much a form of self-hatred because they're pretty much it's the whole like, oh, I'm like Asian, but I'm the good kind of Asian, not the bad kind, but on a whole societal level, like
yes. It's about hierarchy, right? They
yeah,
see themselves as a higher, or like, okay, yeah. We may share some Chinese heritage or whatever, but we got the better form of it, right? We preserve the traditional culture better. We are more culture. We're more cultivated. Look, we're more well behaved. We're the better class of Asians.
yeah.
That's what it comes down to. But
And that really pissed me off, like even me growing up, because like I know these people, like it doesn't matter, like once you're in America and like in the eyes of like mainstream America, you're all the same
yeah,
to them.
I
And
mean,
that's what they don't realize. And then they're so sycophantic to like the West. They beg for like the what the recognition of Westerners and the acknowledgement of them, and that always like from a young age that always bothered me because it's like I grew up in a diaspora, and it's like when I go to Taiwan, it's like okay, I'm part of like I belong, but then I see like the whole like the society at large just replicating that sort of behavior, and I'm just like it always messed with me in the wrong way, and then that kind of more motivated that was more motivation for me to understand imperialism.
yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. I mean, I was genuinely shocked when people in Taiwan, some people, I must say, some people in Taiwan or Hong Kong use the word 支那, right, or in
Yeah.
Japanese, 'ina, the really
Yeah.
derogatory racial epithet that the Japanese used for the Chinese during World War II. Um,
I have an uncle like that in Taiwan. I'm ashamed of.
I mean, that's what we're talking about it, right? Because now it's so common and genuinely shocking because it's like, okay, that was a term for all Chinese. They're basically trying to show, okay, we're not Chinese. So see, we don't even see ourselves as Chinese. So we because we use these derogatory terms for the main.
But then when Japan colonized Taiwan, like the Han Chinese in Taiwan were still considered Hanren. You weren't fucking Japanese. Like the Japanese didn't really see you as Japanese. Like okay, they kind of tried to force assimilation in the like the final few years of colonization, but so then and then these people they say that like the KMT rule is a colonial rule, but then they don't use the same metrics against the Japanese. And I admit a lot of the problems in Taiwan stem from the fact that the KMT did a very bad job just taking over and dealing with internal contradictions. So then like the people from the mainland that many Taiwanese people saw were like the bad ones, like Chiang Kai-shek and his clique. But then like there's also this sort of like identity reductionism where you don't see class because like these people aren't the same as like the soldiers who were tricked to Taiwan, like working class soldiers, everyday common folk. And then the KMT would use that to their advantage, and they're saying, "Oh, these Benshira don't like you, so then we're here to protect you." They would play that to their advantage.
I read the memoir of one of the early proponent of Taiwanese
Which one?
independence.
What
Shit,
do
I
you mean?
don't remember his
What do you
name
mean?
from top of my head. But he basically he wrote that at the handover in 1945 when Japanese surrendered in Taiwan, and and hand over the control to the KMT soldiers, he went with his father to witness the handover, and he wrote down his impression. He thought, oh, okay, like everybody was so excited to see, finally the rule returning to Taiwanese rule, returning to China. But once he got there, he saw these really poorly dressed soldiers wearing like straw sandals and really unkempt uniforms coming over, and he was sorely disappointed. And he's like, wait, what is this, right? Like how these people so poor is coming to take over us. I mean, that he put that moment as the moment where his idea of Taiwanese independence enter his head, enter his mind, and
Well, see, a lot of it stems from classism once again. A lot of it.
exactly. Go
Yeah. So
ahead.
then,
Sorry.
it was also just dealing with a lot of these things and working through these different stories where I more and more developed a communist conscious about really, like, once you understand like historical materialism and dialectical materialism, it's pretty much the only, to me, it's the only ideology and philosophy and like the method that's logically consistent.
Um, do you want to talk about maybe about your latest album? Because I find it very interesting. It has some very fiery lyrics. It's called Little Sparks. Can you talk just a little bit about how you came up, what's your inspiration, and then how you came about creating that album?
My inspiration was I was unhappy with my album from before, so the only way to redeem myself was to make a new album.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, that's the story. And then after I released my previous album, a British producer, Ransom Notes, hit me up through YouTube, and he asked if I was interested in rapping over his beats. So then I was like, okay. So then I got a few beats, and then I kind of sat on them. I didn't really do much with them. But then last year I was going to the DPRK. So then I'm like, if I'm going to the DPRK, I should make a music video there because it's not like every day I can go to the DPRK. So then I made that song, Rumors and Slanders, 流言蜚语.
Can you talk about your
So then,
trip to DPRK? And what are your impressions?
you know how like in the media, how they make Korea look all gray
Yes.
and just drab and really depressing.
Yes.
Now Pyongyang's really colorful.
That concludes a part one of our interview with a Taiwanese Chinese American Marxist rapper, Xiangyu. We will have links to his music on YouTube in the show notes. Meanwhile, please enjoy the title song of his latest album, The Single Spark.